Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our second of three Open Access Week presentations. I'm Larry Milliken. I'm the Manager of Scholarly Communications for Drexel University Libraries. And we have with us today Professor Deborah Clegg, who has a unique background in both clinical and basic sciences and extensive experience as a grant reviewer for institutions such as the National Institutes of Health, the American Diabetes Association, the Veterans Administration, and the Swiss government's federal foundation. She's been awarded numerous grants as either a principal investigator or co-PI. She was formerly a clinical dietitian, a diabetes educator, and director of the master's degree programs in nutrition at Emory University and also at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. She's made substantial contributions to the scientific literature through her basic science, where the overarching goal of her research is to understand how nutrients and hormones influence disease prevalence. And she'll be joining us today to talk about open access. And go ahead if you have questions to unmute yourself and ask away, or you could ask through the chat and I'll break in and pass the question along. And let's go ahead and begin. I'll turn it over to you, Debbie.
Oh, fantastic. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. So I just want to start off with like sort of full disclosure. I wasn't a fan of open access. My entire career, I was like, open access, no, that's bad. And then I was asked to give a presentation on open access, and the more I dug in, the more I'm like, wow, this is really cool. We should all be doing open access. So I'm going to give you this presentation probably as a convert. So I've switched over now. My last paper I actually published using open access. So with that sort of eye or that lens, I just want to kind of give that to you so that I've published in both worlds, but I think there's an awfully amazing, compelling argument to now beginning to switch over to the open access. So with that, could we have the next slide, please? So this is just a bit of an overview, so we'll just go ahead and click through this. So I want to define what open access actually is. Next. And then talk to you a little bit about the origin. I didn't actually realize the origin or the rationale for open access, so I want to make sure that maybe you all already know this, but I'm going to provide you a little information. Also about a little bit about data sharing. Next slide. The benefits of open access. Next. The concerns associated with open access. Next. The costs associated with publications. Next. Open access versus public access. There's a difference between that and how the National Institutes of Health reviews this. Next. Copyright ownership. And next. Conclusions, and also provide you some additional reading. So I'm more than happy to share this slide deck with you, especially with all of the ideas with respect to additional reading. So next slide, please. So this is sort of the way I think it currently happens in the publication world. You complete your scholarship or your research. Then as you're starting to prepare your manuscript, I actually think that you should identify the journal as you're preparing your manuscript so that you, instead of like me, you write your paper and then you figure out what the journal is and then you have to rewrite your paper because your word count or the style or whatever doesn't conform with the manuscript. So I think it's a really good idea that as you're collecting your data and as you're preparing your manuscript, you're also thinking about which journal you're about to submit to. So then after you've done all that, then you actually do submit to the journal. Then that journal sends your paper out to 2 to 3 people to review the work, and then you will get feedback. Now, this process can take from anywhere from, maybe a couple of weeks, which journals are now trying to make sure that all of us who are reviewers, that we get our comments back within 2 weeks. I have had the unfortunate experience where I wrote a paper and it took 2 months in between each time I received every feedback before I would get more feedback. That becomes really concerning, especially if you have very timely data or a timely scholarship topic that you need and want to be published. published. You might even look for, there's information online about how long a journal typically takes from soup to nuts to the time you submit a paper until it's actually published. That might be a very, very important feature for you to look at, because you may not be able to wait for an entire year between the time you submit your paper until the time it actually comes out online. So then, of course, the paper is either accepted or rejected, and then eventually it is published. So that's sort of just basically the timeline. So next slide, please. So this is, again, just sort of a schematic. I'm extremely visual. So here you are, you've accumulated your data or your scholarship. Now in today's environment, now you have two options. You have the option to decide whether you wish to publish your scholarship in the open access or to go through a subscription-based journal format. So next slide. So what is open access? Well, open means anyone can freely access, use, modify, and share for any purpose. So some of those words might be concerning or buzzwords to you, but let's sort of flesh this out a little bit more. So next slide, please. So open access provides free, immediate online access to published results of scholarly research. And this is the key. So again, as I was indicating a minute ago, you may have something that you have found that is so timely that you want, just for example, you could say, oh, I all of a sudden have a vaccine for COVID. Okay, you want to get that out there immediately. And so you might want to then use open access because your scholarship could get out into the public domain really, really rapidly. If you happen to try and put that phenomenal paper through the normal subscription-based platform, again, it can take anywhere between 6 months and a year. It could be slightly less, but it does take an incredibly long time, even after your paper has been published or accepted for publication, before it actually goes out into the public domain. There's now about 2,500 peer-reviewed journals which are published worldwide. And unfortunately, which is probably why the library is really interested in this as well, is it's really costly to maintain those subscriptions for you and I to access through the library. It's extremely expensive. So the more data that we can actually publish in the open access format, the library doesn't have to pay in order to be able to get open access material, which nor do you or I. How many times have you actually found a paper that you really want to look at, but now you have to pay for it in order to be able to see it, or the library doesn't have a subscription, so you have to pay $150 or some absorbent amount in order to be able to get access to that article. If we start publishing more of our works in open access, that would become a dinosaur. That would never happen again. If 100% of the research articles then are freely accessible through open access, then usage, impact, and productivity and the progress of research might be maximized. So next slide. So and if you click again, this actually has a really nice graphic that goes with it. It used to be that, so click again if you don't mind. Yeah, just one more click. Hopefully it'll pop up. There we go. It used to be that, again, not very many articles were being published in open access, but now the numbers of articles published in open access has increased significantly more recently. And I think that this could be a really exciting trend, especially if you think about my last bullet point, which is the more we do this, the more the public has access to our scholarly research, and maybe the more we'll be able to actually excel science while we're doing that. So this, I think, is an exciting trend. Next slide, please. So what's the origin of open access? So if we click again, it's actually intrinsically tied to the development of the internet. So if you click again, so the idea here is that with the internet, we all have access now to all of this print material. Tons. I mean, all we have to do is just do a quick, I'll use the word Google because of course it's in the paper right now, but you can do any type of research, literature search, and there's the article, right? Especially if it's open access. So it's the idea is that now that we have the internet, we don't have to go to the library and find an article that's been published in an actual journal where you actually are looking at it on magazine paper. Now you can just do it on the internet. So this was really the origin of open access. So next click. And so as a consequence, in theory, the cost of the research articles should have decreased because, again, with the internet, which is free, we should be able then to access all of this information. But if you do the next click, instead what's happened is that the cost is actually increasing about 250% to actually publish your articles. So instead of having it less costly to publish your research, these subscription journals, I think, are getting scared perhaps, and so now they're even charging more for you to publish your results in a subscription-based format journal. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about access to publicly funded research. Next. So the major principle underlying this was the ownership of who owns the actual research. So next. And the idea here is that publicly funded research are actually public goods. And so if your research has been funded by anything like such as the National Institute of Health, your data, your research should be in the public domain. It should be accessible to anyone and everyone because your taxpayers' dollars have actually paid for that research to actually be conducted, and then also we should have access to all of the information that's garnered from that research. Next slide, or next. So open access then maximizes the access to research findings. It increases the research impact to a wider readership. And there's a lot of information about this, which is now because more people have the opportunity to see it, now the information gets out into a wider domain, and perhaps then it will actually increase the impact of that research. It also expands shared knowledge across a scientific field. It used to be if you published in a journal, again, that maybe your library didn't have a subscription to, maybe you never saw those data. But now with open access, now we all can see the data, and maybe that will actually increase shared information across the scientific field. It also makes research output more visible, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. It increases the citation impact of the author, and over time, perhaps even increases the journal's impact factor. So next slide, please. And this has 2 clicks, so click again. This is just, in my past life, I spent a lot of time focusing on the impact factor of the journal. And a large number of institutes actually even tie promotion and your scholarship to where you're actually publishing your data. And then the way they've done that is the impact factor of the journal. And so how is impact factors actually, that's calculated by dividing the number of citations of that journal in a year by the total number of articles published in 2 previous years. So to my knowledge, the highest impact journal, impact factor journal, is the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm actually privileged to have, I think I have 3 articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, but when I actually look at my scholarship or how many citations I actually get from all of my published articles, I get very few from the New England Journal of Medicine. So perhaps impact factor isn't necessarily what we should hang our hat on with respect to whether we're doing scholarly work or not. Some of my other articles that are published in lower impact journals, I actually have more citings from, and it's possible because it's probably very costly for libraries to have a subscription to the New England Journal, and maybe these lower impact journals, it's less costly, and therefore I get more people who are actually seeing my work. So this is just to say, we put a lot of attention on impact factor of journals where it might not necessarily be something that we should really only hang our hat on. We should also look at the overall scholarship of what we're producing. So next slide, please. So what the exciting thing is that the impact factor of open access journals is actually increasing. And I think this is going to be something that we're going to see as a trend. So I think that the more scholarly publications are published in an open access journal, the higher their impact factor will become. And if you think about it, given my last analogy, you might even get a greater impact factor with an open access journal because it has everybody can see that scholarly publication, as opposed to only a select few who can either afford it or who happen to have a subscription to that journal. Next slide, please. So this is just looking at the impact factor or the citation for open access. These are studies that were conducted, and 46 studies found that there was actually a citation advantage to publishing your work in an open access journal. They also found 7 studies that were non-conclusive, and 17 studies found that there was no citation advantage. And again, I have a feeling that when we look at this pie chart, it's going to continue to change. I have a feeling that the more we publish in open access, the larger that percentage will be where there's actually a citation advantage. Next slide, please. So this is just looking at the impact factor for the open access journals, and so PLOS Biology is ranked #1 with respect to its impact factor. So if you were trying to consider publishing in an open access journal, you might want to go to a site such as this so you could see what the impact factor is of that specific open access journal. Again, that is if you put a large amount of stock and credibility with respect to the impact factors, but that's definitely something that you could look up. And so what's cool is that they're starting to actually categorize open access journals with respect to their impact factors. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of open access journals? Next. So it makes it, as I've indicated, the research then becomes available to anyone with internet access. And that's what's so amazingly cool, right? So anybody can read this. Next slide. Or next. It also supports sustainable lifelong learning because, again, people who, especially during COVID, when maybe some people didn't have a lot to do, they could have sat in their at-home office and just, gone through and found what all the scholarly articles are with respect to a certain topic. And they wouldn't have had to hook up to the library. They could have just done this from home. And so it actually provides an opportunity for sustainable lifelong learning. Next click. It also offers anyone information. It actually opens the possibilities for people to use or to create or to find unexpected or creative, innovative ways to connect. So some of my my most recent open access paper, it has been incredible the number of people who have reached out to me. It was specifically on the transgender population, and it's been amazing the number of people who have reached out to me to, try to either talk to me more about the research, or I'm just getting a much wider interest in the scholarly publication than I ever would have if it had stayed in a subscription journal. Next click, please. And so these are some examples of some of the groups or individuals who might benefit from open access. They could be citizen scientists, again, people who have been sort of armchair scientists. They want to look up something. They now have the ability to find this information. Even patients. Oftentimes our patients are becoming incredibly brilliant because they can go onto the internet and they can find out all about their disease before they ever come in and see us. So this provides a really wonderful, enriching opportunity for not only our patients, but also for those that we serve. Health advocates and also those who benefit from translation or transformative. These are people who might be sight impaired. There are ways then that you can provide them information that you've published through the open access format. Next slide, please. So open access also may enhance the rigor and reproducibility. So this is really, really important because I've actually published a large number of data papers, and what's really interesting is that with the advent of open access, people now can either recalculate your data and then they can call you on it. Like, okay, when I recalculated the mean and the average, it doesn't come up with the numbers that you've actually provided. And that can really, and then you have to go back and then say, oh my gosh, yeah, there was an error in my math. But it actually can enhance the overall rigor and reproducibility of your work. And I think that this is going to be really, really exciting as this continues. Next. Because oftentimes with lack of reproducibility, it's driven by an overemphasis of novelty instead of rigor. This has been a huge problem in the literature right now, which is that a lot of these subscription journals, the people who are the reviewers are buddies and friends, and they get things through the review process because they're buddies and friends, or because the topic is really novel. But when you try to go back and reproduce those people's results, you can't, because because it was ramroded through the publication process. Where if it's in open access, now all of a sudden everybody has the ability to look at it, and I think that that then enhances again the ability for all of us to critique the science that's published, and that will again enhance overall rigor and reproducibility. Next slide, or next. It would also alleviate some of the problems with reproducibility. There have been many papers that have stymied me in my progression in my science because I couldn't ever reproduce the way they actually, or I could never use the methods they provided in the paper and reproduce them. I could never do that. And that then caused me to have to contact the authors, and then they would send me their methods, and maybe it's been a problem. Where I think with open access, that will reduce the amount of problems, because there will be more people like me saying, hey, I can't reproduce this. And then that will enhance people's accountability. Next slide. And then again, this is just basically what I was saying, is that it just really should enhance overall reproducibility and accountability. Next slide. This is just a quote: "Those who share data do better science," and I couldn't agree with that more. You know, the more we share of our science, I think, the more we share of our data, the better we actually are. And again, it goes back to, you know, we should be doing this, especially those of us who have been funded by the National Institutes of Health or any of the government agencies. We owe it to the taxpayers to be able to put our data out there and have them read what we've been funded to be able to do. So next slide. So what are the negatives? So I've talked a lot about the positives. So what are the negatives associated with open access? So next click. Unfortunately, because this is such a phenomenal opportunity, there have been organizations or journals that are exploiting open access, and basically these are sham, and you probably get them in your junk or your spam email like on a daily basis. I get, you know, publish your results in this journal, but unfortunately there's a fee associated with that, so it's not really truly open access. But there are also some people then are shortcutting. I'm sorry, I have a fly, shortcutting the publication process. So instead of having your journal article peer reviewed, you can just pay to have it published. That's not what we want. We want still this to maintain the same level of scholarship, and the peer review process is critical. So we don't want to bypass that and just get our data published. So next slide. So there is a subcategory of these open access journals known as vanity presses. These are also pseudo journals, predatory journals. These are the people who are scamming out there, scamming you, looking for your dollars to pay for your publication and bypass the peer review. Next slide. And these they're deceptive publishers, and so these are the ones that you really want to avoid. So next slide. And actually there has been a list of these individuals. So if you are thinking of publishing in an open access journal and you don't know about the quality of the open access journal, you could go to this site and it would identify those that are using deceptive publication practices. Okay, next slide.
Debbie?
Yes.
We have a question that came in over chat.
Okay.
And it's, I haven't found any open access journals that don't have exorbitant publishing fees. As a postdoc, I can't afford to pay the fees. How do I deal with this issue?
It's actually, there's going to be some slides coming up, but I'm going to answer that right now. That is that there are some open access journals that don't have exorbitant fees, number one. But number two, and you'll see it in a slide that's coming up, there are ways, especially as a postdoc, that you can email the journal and they are coming up with novel ways that reduce the costs or even completely negate the cost of you publishing in an open access journal. So my recommendation to you is, if you've identified an open access journal you'd like to publish in, email them. Say, I'm a postdoc, I don't have any money. This is a really important piece of paper or scholarship that I want to publish. Can we waive the fee? And see whether they will indeed do that. And there are journals now that are starting to do that, because I too, when I published my first in the open access, the fee was exorbitant. It was horrific. But it's one of those cost benefits. But I have a feeling, my hope is that the more opportunities we have for publishing in open access, that the fee structure will go down in price as opposed to up. I guess I can hope for that anyway. But I definitely would say email the journal and see what you can do about negotiating a reduction in the fee. Okay, we can go to the next slide. It could even be the next slide. Publication costs. All right, so go ahead. So typically the publication costs are associated with the operating costs, so go ahead and click again. And that has to do with the processing of the article, click again, as well as the management fee of organizing and running the journal. There's also other costs, and go ahead and click again. And the closed access publishers typically charge for this through subscriptions. For example, for my New England Journal of Medicine articles that I have had, instead of paying the New England Journal to publish my paper there, I actually get a royalty, which is insane. I get money. It's like, actually, I think when one of them I got $1,000 because so many people, the pharmaceutical industry recognizes that it has the highest impact factor. So the pharmaceutical industries and other organizations are pouring money into the New England Journal. And that's how the New England Journal has so much money. And they have so much money that they actually can pay authors to publish after it's been accepted and through, they pay you. It's like, okay, it's really hard to get in there, but all right, I'll get paid. So that is on the higher end of the tier, but that's very unusual. But that's really where the closed access make their money. Next click. And yeah, but due to the subscription costs, again, for whatever reason, unlike the New England Journal, other journals are have increased their cost to publish about 250% over the last 30 years, which is obscene. So that's a huge problem. So next click. Okay, next again. So authors have been paying to publish, and it can be viewed as a fundamental conflict, right? So I'm paying Journal Cell to publish in your journal, so that can be considered to be a fundamental conflict of interest. I'm paying you to publish my work, right? That could be viewed. Go ahead and click again. But the way it is supposed to work is that the editorial decision is made, and then the fee structure has happened after the editorial decision, so that the cost associated with it is not supposed to factor into the scholarliness of your article, right? All of this fee structure is supposed to happen on the back end. Next. So many journals again, have charges associated with it. Go ahead and click next.
Debbie, we have another, I guess, question.
Okay.
I'm still trying to figure out in what other ways publishers can afford to publish full open access to all the articles in their journals without having to have a APC. IEEE is offering now additional OA journals, but APC will be $2,045 an article. Author has to pay it. Question is, how can we inspire authors to consider paying APC charges, and can grants funding provide this support?
Definitely on the last portion of it, which is, I strongly recommend when you are submitting your budget for your grant, make sure that you have a publication cost in your line item budget, because that's going to be really critical, because as you have effectively articulated, it is expensive to publish. Again, I think the more we go to the journals and say, oh my gosh, this is insanely expensive, we can maybe do some negotiation on the cost structure. But definitely put the monies into your grant to offset the cost of you publishing, for sure. I think I answered your question with respect to that. I think so. If not, circle back to me again. Go ahead and click through the rest of this slide. So yeah, so this is analogous to what the question was. So even things like the PNAS and CEL, we're still paying a large amount of money to publish in those, and those are subscription based. So equating open access with pay to publish is actually a bit of a misnomer. Closed journals also charge to publish. So again, I think that what we are seeing is this is sort of an interesting playing field where we want to publish more of our data in open access, but there's a fee structure that's pretty high. So I think we just have to, as scholars who are wishing to have this open access, I think we just have to push back and say, look, that's too expensive, and see if you can negotiate. That's my recommendation. Oh, next, I think that's it for that slide. Okay, yeah, so this is the one that says that they offer a fee waiver scheme. So I think that this is, we should start really utilizing this as especially when you're a postdoc, or I've even had some of the individuals that have left my lab, starting out their new lab, they've come back to me and say, well, you've paid for this publication, or can we write a waiver that says, yeah, I'm starting off my new lab, can I get any assistance on reducing the cost? And they've been able to get a reduction in cost. So it's something to consider. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, so again, this comes back to that other question, which was fantastic, which was open access journals do not generate revenue, right? And so the question was, how is it that they're able to offset the cost of publishing with the fact that they're not generating revenue? And the only way they're generating revenue right now is through the charge that they're assigning you for your publication. So this is, again, I think that, again, institutional university memberships may be paid on behalf of the authors. There might be international funding agencies that can offset the cost. Government can subsidize maybe some open access publishers, and some open access journals require payments from the authors for article submission, and that's what we were talking about. Some of them are pretty hefty, but I think we start negotiating and pushing back. Next slide.
I have another question.
Okay, cool.
Is charging a fee common outside of STEM publications? I have published OA twice in African Studies and in Political Communication, and I didn't have to pay a dime. I did have to do my own copy editing.
Yeah, no, so see, that's what we want to happen, right? So I think that there are open access journals that don't charge a fee, and then there are some that are going to be charging a fee, but I think that the more we publish in those that doesn't charge a fee, that will maybe change, again, really put a impetus for these people to start reducing the fee structure. But yes, there are some that do not have the fee, for sure. Okay, so next slide, please. So NIH, the National Institutes of Health, requires now, and I've alluded to this, that all of your research that's been funded by the government actually has to hit the public domain. So go ahead and click. The way that they do this is not necessarily, it's not through open access, that as soon as you have a paper that's published from that's associated with a grant that was funded by the National Institute of Health, you have to go through and make sure that this paper hits the PubMed Central. So if you click to the next slide. So they're now putting teeth in this, so that NIH will delay processing of an award if the publications arising from it are not in compliance with an NIH public access policy. And so investigators must use the NCBI to enter your publication into the progress reports. And so I've provided you some links to that. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to email you and I can provide you other links. But if you go to the next slide, they are starting to really put teeth in this, and that if you are non-compliant, this is a sample of a non-compliance notification that says you XYZ have not been compliant and therefore we withhold funding of your grant. So there are some serious teeth with respect to this. So just make sure that if you have a scholarship that's been funded by the NIH, that you comply with their rules of public access. Next slide. Okay, so the other thing to consider, which I think is interesting, is that with open access, you still own the copyright of your material. And so go ahead and click through this slide. So instead of publishers granting non-exclusive rights to publish, the copyright is actually maintained by the authors. And this is a huge power shift. It used to be that your data was basically owned by the journal that has the data, but now with open access, you maintain the ownership of your data. This may become a really important issue for when you decide whether to publish in an open access forum or not. And that is that if you publish in open access, your copyright is maintained with you. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. I know I'm getting short on time. Actually, I'm over. Okay, oops. Let's go ahead. Yeah, let's just use this one. Perfect. So these are the things that you might consider. If we go back one, just one. This is what you might use as your sort of decision tree for considering open access. That you maintain your author's rights, that it actually enhances equitable access to research, that it provides a wide distribution of your research, much wider than a subscription journal, and that it promotes authors and allows the impact to showcase your work. Next, please. So these are just potential questions that you might have, and then if you go to the next one, because we're low on time, these are just further supplemental reading should you be interested in learning more about open access, and if you have any additional questions that I can't answer, we can refer you to some of these reading sources. So I know that I think I went over a bit, but I'm more than happy to entertain any additional questions that people might have.
Thanks, Debbie. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask them, or I'll continue to read what comes up through the chat.
I want to say thank you very much, that was really great. I want to be able to show this to my graduate students in communication, culture, and media. I think it's been recorded, so the library will have it. Thank you. I wanted to throw in one thing. I work in sub-Saharan Africa. So your list of people who benefit when you publish open access could be expanded to mention people in the developing world, as well as scholars who don't have affiliations and therefore don't have library access. So those are two other groups that really, really benefit from open access.
Oh, thank you for that, because I've been to some international meetings, and what's happening is that the International Science Society is relying on textbooks because they can get those, and as we all know, textbooks are already dated before they ever have before they're ever bound. So giving them access to online or more up-to-date research is phenomenal. So thank you. That was perfect. Perfect. I'll add that to my slide. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Larry?
Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk today. Just a question about challenges that might occur when content moves across the open-closed access boundary, right? If you publish in open, does it end up, is it harder to go into closed, or if it's enclosed? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit? Is that a problem, or?
That's a great question. Like, so are people not? I'm gonna do it from my I'm gonna answer it. Like, I think what you're asking is sort of like if you were in industry and wanted to go to academia, could you go back and forth? Can you go back and forth with the data? And I think that as more of us are publishing in open access, it's going to be a smoother transition between back and forth. And I'm going to be a fortune teller. I think in 10 years this is going to be the standard. But it'll be really interesting to see. But I think that as people realize that this provides a much more open framework, especially with respect to reproducibility and rigor, I think that this will be deemed more successful than the standard sponsored, the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, Lloyd, let me talk a little bit about your question as well. What's nice about open access publications is that basically you maintain your rights because they're usually under a Creative Commons license, which means that most of the time, if you would like, once you've published an open access publication, for instance, and you would like to, for instance, you find that you would like to publish in a proprietary journal because it's related perhaps to promotion and tenure or something, and you wanted it to be a more prestigious journal. Since you've maintained the rights, what usually happens is that with the permission of the open access journal, you're allowed to republish with another because you've maintained your first publication. All you have to say is that they have first publication rights, but as the author, you still maintain your author rights.
I did not know that. Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Thanks, Fred.
Something else I will say is that this whole practice, the whole issue between proprietary and open access journals comes down to the fact that when you want to publish with a proprietary journal, you need to make sure that you go over your copyright agreement that they send you and work with the library, especially Larry and myself, because we're both copyright experts, to make sure that if that's the journal you want to publish with and not in an open access journal, that you only ask them to take first publication rights, not all of the other rights that you're signing away. Because that's what the journals want you to do. They want you to give them all the publication rights so then that they own your research. And you don't want that to happen. If you start doing that, then you still maintain control of your research and can, for instance, republish in an open access journal later on. But if you don't make sure to negotiate those rights up front, you've lost that right to do any other type of publication anywhere else with that particular article.
That was outstanding. Thank you.
Right now, also, I'll just throw this in real quick. The American Association of University Women, AAUW, has a call out right now for applications. I think they're due November 1st or October 31st to submit for, essentially they'll pay you to write and publish. And so the applications I think are $6,000. So that can get you in 2 or 3 open access journals that have those fees.
That's fantastic. Thanks for
sharing.
sharing.
The information is on their website. There are a couple other places that do scholarships for this purpose. I can't remember them right now, but if I find them in my email, I'll send them out to Debbie.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. That's amazing. Thank you.
Jay, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I think continuing on what Brett said, I think this is an excellent comment. But I want to know how many faculty and researchers are actually aware of their author rights. I feel that a lot of authors take a pride in having an article published in a top scientific journal in Elsevier or other publishers, but I'm not sure, are they really aware of what they are missing when they give out their copyrights to them?
I would say, I know for myself, I had no idea, right? I was not aware. So, but please answer anyone else.
Sure, so I think I can address that. In a previous incarnation, I was the Scholarly Communications Officer for the University of California, Santa Barbara. And my job basically was assisting faculty in making decisions about where their research was to be published and them in rewriting their copyright agreements to make sure that they maintained control of their copyright for their research. Santa Barbara has 6 Nobel Prize winning physicists and so on their faculty. And so the science there is very high. And what's very important also to the scientific community is making sure that their research is publicly available and accessible. And the first step to doing that is making sure that faculty understand copyright. It's wonderful if you can publish in Nature. That's a journal that everybody, in that particular area wants to publish in. But if you don't examine their copyright agreement up front, you give them all of your rights for future access to use that research, not only in your classroom, but in a textbook or even giving a presentation at a conference. So what's very important is that in the education process, I think, is that faculty understand the economics of digital information now. And it's all linked up to that copyright agreement that you receive when your article is accepted for publication. And again, we'll be talking more about this through library webinars in the future, but the library can assist faculty when they're making a decision about where to publish and assist them in making sure that they send an addendum to their copyright agreement back to the publishers. And 95% of the time, these addendums are accepted now, where they are only taking first publication rights and not all of the other rights that they have in the past. And that's very important for open access publishing in the future.
Fantastic.
Are there other questions out there?
I'd also like to put in a plug here for open access for faculty running new journals for the creation of new knowledge. I am a Tolkien scholar, and my background is in medieval music and liturgy, but also in Tolkien studies. And in 2013, I founded and currently edit a journal called the Journal of Tolkien Research, which is an open access peer-reviewed journal that's on the Digital Commons platform. The Digital Commons platform was developed by faculty at the University of California, Berkeley, because they got tired of the fact that much of their research was proprietary and they could no longer make it accessible to the public or share it in the classroom. And this platform is a very highly intuitive, simple platform for not only faculty, but also for graduate students and undergraduate students to run their own journals from. I can say that in the 7 years that I have run this journal, one of the main considerations for founding it was that Tolkien scholars are a very multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary group. So we have not only academics among the scholarship, we also have non-academics, what we call independent scholars. And one of their main concerns when I first started talking to them was that we have only one journal in the field, which is a proprietary journal, which many of the independent scholars could not afford to get access to. And so open access was an alternative. I took that opportunity to found the journal, and now we have a worldwide base of scholarship that's open access that includes not only academics, but non-academics. And I think this is very important going into the future, is that many of our disciplines now are interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. They're not necessarily full of faculty members who belong to universities where proprietary information is the only way to access research. And so the library is hoping in the future to examine these types of publishing platforms and make them available to the faculty and the students here at Drexel as well.
Love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that is, part of that added benefit of everyone being able to read it. You don't have to have that institutional affiliation to be able to participate in the field, which really expands, access to all the smart people who have good ideas that they want to contribute.
And let me also say that one of the benefits of this idea of the library as publisher using these types of platforms is that Google Scholar mines this information every night from the journal, so that any new article I can publish automatically once it's accepted. Not only is it automatically published, but it's automatically indexed by Google that night, so that it immediately has a worldwide base that's much faster than any proprietary journal could ever get.
That's really fast. That's amazing.
Lloyd, did you have another question? Oh, you have to go? Okay. Thanks for joining us. So I think this is probably a good time to wrap up for the afternoon. But I want to thank Debbie for her fantastic presentation and sparking some good conversation. And I also want to make a pitch for our presentation tomorrow, Thursday, 3 p.m. Ted Bergstrom from UC Santa Barbara will be joining us to talk about monopoly power and open publishing. So I hope you can join us tomorrow as well for another presentation and conversation. So thank you everybody for coming and joining us today.
Thanks, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.